Light rain showers stretching from North Carolina through South Carolina, even into northern Georgia. More light rain. We're also watching a few thunderstorms off the southern Mississippi and also the Louisiana coastline, seeing a few more showers coming in overnight towards the Biloxi and Gulfport area. Otherwise, a little light bit of rain and snow across the northern plains and scattered showers here in the Pacific Northwest as well. For you travelers, the Northwest and Upper Midwest could see some problems for delays.
It was a ship of Hollywood legend, caught in a storm of epic proportions.
At one point in time, I know we were hitting 80-knot winds, so things got pretty crazy real quick. You didn't have much of a choice. You were going into the water.
But this was no movie.
All right, we got people on this raft. Storm's going down.
This was real life, with real danger.
He's working his way back to the raft.
And real heroes. It was one of the most dramatic rescues in Coast Guard history.
Yeah, here we go. The whole raft just got tossed.
Be advised, our life raft flipped over.
The rescue of the HMS Bounty. On October 25th, 2012, Hurricane Sandy was continuing its march up the eastern seaboard, packing 90-mile-per-hour winds and 30-foot waves. This superstorm had tropical storm force winds blowing across an area more than 900 miles wide and was on a deadly collision course with the northeast coast.
Sandy was an enormous storm in magnitude compared to other storms we've had. I've been in impacted areas where hurricanes have come through, so I respect Mother Nature and I take appropriate actions.
Hurricane Sandy was a major event, and we knew it was going to be a major event well before it hit landfall. We knew that there could be anywhere from pretty bad to total devastation, depending upon exactly where it hit and where people were located.
Coastal cities were evacuated, houses boarded up, and boats secured as residents of the East Coast braced themselves to be slammed by the epic storm. On October 25th, 4 days before Hurricane Sandy made landfall, Captain Robin Walbridge told the crew of 16 the 50-year-old boat's wooden hull would fare better at sea than at port. A decision was made to set sail for St. Petersburg, Florida.
We had a meeting on deck, and the captain said, I know that quite a few of y'all are getting phone calls and emails regarding this hurricane. I wouldn't blame any of y'all if you wanted to get off now, and I won't hold anything against you, and I won't think any worse of you.
You know, there was an option to leave the ship. Nobody took it because we had complete faith in the captain and his abilities and in ourselves. In the past, the ship had been in storms much more severe than Hurricane Sandy, so there was no reason for us to fear going into the storm.
He then went on to explain his strategy for trying to get around the hurricane. His thoughts were that the hurricane usually comes up and track inland, or it's going to come up and track out to sea. We headed south-southeast, and I am not sure when, but somewhere along the line, the determination was made that we should cut back more southwest to try to get on the leeward side of the hurricane where the winds would be less prevailing.
The HMS Bounty was a replica of an 18th century square-rigged ship built by MGM Studios for the movie Mutiny on the Bounty, starring Marlon Brando as Fletcher Christian.
They spent $750,000 building her in 1960. She was the most expensive movie set in the world at the time.
The original screenplay had the Bounty burned at the end of the film, but Brando, getting wind of this, said he would not finish the movie if they burned the ship.
Being as large as she is, she's a handsome thing, and Marlon Brando didn't want her to be burnt, so she's been with us ever since.
After the film had finished, MGM found themselves with a large ship without a home, so they sent it to St. Petersburg, Florida, where it lived for 21 years as a tourist attraction. In 1986, media mogul Ted Turner purchased MGM's archival film library, unaware that the HMS Bounty came with the deal.
He was surprised one day when the accountants came to him and said, "Well, sir, you own a 3-masted tall ship."
Turner, not interested in the upkeep of this enormous ship, donated it to a group that established the Tall Ship Bounty Foundation to operate the ship as an educational venture.
And in time, she was used for a number of other movies: Captain Yellowbeard, Treasure Island,
The pirate movies really brought a lot of extra focus because you got multiple generations now. You've got those that saw her as a Mutiny on the Bounty story, and then you've got those younger ones who have seen the pirate movies.
The public was fascinated with his ship because of that. People always knew which ship Bounty was.
A replica, a movie prop, a tourist attraction, and an educational tool. The HMS Bounty was rich with history and made many successful transatlantic voyages.
When we left port from Connecticut, the weather was pretty nice. It was sunny, nice breeze, and there was a little bit of chop, but it was all a good sail. Over the course of our transit, the winds picked up a little bit.
It started getting pretty daggone rough, and it continued to get worse and worse. At one point in time, I know we were hitting 80-knot winds.
The waves got a little higher. We had 6-foot seas, and then, eventually 12-foot seas. When the water got fairly high, the captain made the call, and we got in touch with the Coast Guard.
At 9 p.m., the Coast Guard in Wilmington, North Carolina, responds to a distress call from the HMS Bounty. The ship is 120 miles off the coast, listing badly and taking on water. The Coast Guard immediately dispatches a C-130 from Raleigh, North Carolina that has been pre-stationed there due to the severity of Hurricane Sandy.
Having a vessel that was in distress in the middle of a hurricane was my nightmare scenario.
The call came in, and I was right on the limits of being able to safely take off. But my gut tells me that given the conditions out there, this wasn't going to be just a quick go establish radio communications. There was probably a situation developing.
We have a storm that's coming up the coast, and we have a vessel that had 16 people, and if we didn't do something, they were probably not going to survive.
On their first communication, they relayed to us that they had suffered 2 generator casualties. They had lost the ability to email their position, and they were taking on water approximately 2 feet per hour. At the time, they were just short of 6 feet of standing water, and that's when we descended into the hurricane wall.
At 4:26 a.m., the first C-130 crew reports back to base that the HMS Bounty is abandoning ship.
We'll get everybody all in one spot, and we'll get going since it's so far away.
All right.
Can catch up with us.
You ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Roger.
At 5:25 a.m., the Coast Guard dispatches the first of 2 MH-60 rescue helicopters. The second will follow 30 minutes later. The next 3 hours will be critical, not only for the Coast Guard rescuers, but for the crew of the HMS Bounty. Their sinking ship is being pounded in 30-foot seas and gale force winds reaching 80 miles per hour.
In a big storm like Sandy, every minute, every hour is vital in saving a life.
We flew out in 0 visibility, low clouds, couldn't see anything outside the cockpit window. Rain squalls would come through periodically, so the combination of everything made it unlike any flying situation I'd ever been in before.
The pilots are entering new territory, flying directly into a massive hurricane, the likes of which has never been seen before.
Flying into a hurricane was a first for many of us on the crew that night, myself included. Strapped in a C-130, descending into a hurricane and not really knowing what to expect in terms of the weather ahead and how the aircraft's going to handle it.
I've been in some real bad weather, but it also went through my head as, hey, we might not make it back. There is a chance that we might be in the water with these people.
Coming up,
Summer's going into the water.
the Coast Guard skills are pushed to the limit
Body surfing right there.
as they attempt to save 16 crew members from a sinking ship in the middle of the largest storm ever seen in the Atlantic Ocean.
Here we go. That whole raft just got tossed.
When it comes to the financial obstacles military families face, we understand. At USAA, we know military life is different. We've been there. That's why every bit of financial advice we offer is geared specifically to current and former military members and their families.
Dad!
Life brings obstacles. USAA brings advice. Call or visit us online. We're ready to help.
Alaska is back.
Hey, can you hear me? Daring new rescues, braving new storms.
The winds have never been that bad.
All new episodes. Hurry, help! Coast Guard Alaska, tonight at 9, only on the Weather Channel.
On October 29th, Hurricane Sandy was continuing its march up the eastern seaboard, growing to 500 miles wide, making it the largest storm the Atlantic Ocean has ever seen. The HMS Bounty and its 16 crew members left New London, Connecticut on October 23rd. 6 days later, over 100 miles off the coast of North Carolina, they find themselves in perilous seas.
A wooden boat is always sinking. It's always taking in water.
I had noticed, particularly in the engine room, that we were taking on more water than we were pumping out, and I could see some of the entry points from up above the waterline where the ship was heeled over so far. I was able to get down there to pump the boat out. The engine room was hot, well over 100 degrees down there at this point in time. If I could work more than 15, 20 minutes, it was a miracle because I felt like I was going to pass out.
Captain and the first mate were keeping in constant contact with the Coast Guard, relaying all our information.
The Bounty's captain, Robin Walbridge, was born with sailing in his blood. As a teenager, he discovered small boat sailing and never looked back. Walbridge was drawn to the beauty and simplicity of square-rigged sailing ships, rich in tradition and history. They would serve as his open sea classroom. In 1995, he took command of the HMS Bounty, sailing her on goodwill missions all over the world. Captain Walbridge considered square-rigged sailing a dying art and would do whatever he could to keep it alive.
Robin was particularly interesting for his persistence in supporting a vision about bounty and preserving bounty. He was single-handedly can be credited with getting enthusiasm for doing that.
Very interesting things about the Bounty was the aspect of learning how to do it the old way.
The ship was able to go out and teach people about history, get people involved, make people think about what it was like back then and what it's still like on a tall ship.
Captain Walbridge, he had been with his ship for 17 years. He knew his ship, he loved his ship, he managed every aspect of it. I would have been happy to have sailed with him in any vessel.
We were all part of the crew. You did what you could. You learned how to do the next job up.
The volunteers are learning to be deckhands. The deckhands are learning to be ABs, the ABs to be mates, and the mates to be captains. We all started sailing because we thought that we wanted to learn how to sail, but really, we were learning how to live in society as a group and as a family and work as a team. Robin always said that we were the future captains of America.
He did things with the ship that had not been done with it for decades, and I was more surprised, I think, than anyone to find that he, of all the people who might have been lost with a ship, that he and Bounty were the ones that were struck.
The ship was listing very heavily, so we all got up on the deck. Even though it was our desire to keep the ship afloat, the crew started making preparation just in case we'd have to abandon ship.
The C-130 circles above the survivors, keeping a watchful eye as an MH-60 helicopter races to the scene.
Conditions on scene were horrible. We're talking about a hurricane here. 25-foot waves, occasional 30-foot waves, 55-mile-an-hour winds with occasional gusts up into the 70s range.
I consider myself to be a somewhat experienced C-130 pilot. The things that I did not expect were the turbulence. That was a first for me. I mean, it was constant. It debilitated the crew. Almost immediately, one crew member was completely incapacitated, so that took us down one on the flight deck. Then our drop master in the back was becoming very, very air sick because of the conditions when we were searching with the ramp open. So the air sickness kept taking its toll. Even I started to get a little queasy and like, wow, I don't know how much of this I have in me.
In those conditions, you can't really use the autopilot. Myself and the aircraft commander were taking turns hand-flying the aircraft, maintaining altitude as best we could. You got a lot of winds coming underneath the wings, trying to push you up and down, and you just have to fight it best you can.
Our storm sail was providing us a great deal of stability and lifting the bow of the boat. The problem was it split.
The decks became awash, and the boat heeled all the way over on the starboard side.
We didn't decide we were going to have to abandon the ship. The ship was sinking.
People slid in the water, So people were hanging on. I jumped in. After that, it was all pretty crazy.
When we got that particular call that the HMS Bounty was going into their life raft and they were abandoning ship, that was a surprise.
Based on their tone, their sense of urgency, and the way in which the call was rushed out, I think everybody there knew in an instant what had just happened.
It was at that point we were no longer able to talk to them on the radio.
We wanted another radio call. We wanted to hear them come back and say that, hey, everybody's on the rafts. We're fine. We're okay. We didn't get it. We never heard from them again.
C-130, the fact that we were on scene with them that night was great, but we knew that we were limited on what we could do as far as getting them rescued out of the water.
The C-130 circles above the survivors, keeping a watchful eye as an MH-60 helicopter races to the scene, battling 60-mile-per-hour gale force headwinds.
There's going to be some searching going on for these people.
I think there is too.
The conditions weren't ideal conditions. Obviously, it was raining, definitely windy. So I made a decision that we're going to climb up to 3,000 feet and head out to Hatteras, and then once at Hatteras, descend to gain contact with the water.
Flying into a hurricane in a 60 is unlike any flying that I've ever done before. We had 50-knot winds on the way out. The waves were 30 feet plus.
When the MH-60 helicopter joins the C-130 on the scene, the rescue efforts immediately get underway.
Keep your eyes peeled, just for anybody floating around.
It was absolutely dark, monstrous waves towering over them.
First thing on our mind is, if they see anybody in the water, obviously get them out.
We also found the sinking Bounty.
The hull was submerged, the masts were out of the water, and it was listing to starboard side.
When I first saw that ship, I asked, what is that? And I didn't see any boat, I just saw poles sticking up. Why are there telephone poles out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean?
Coming up.
When I hit the water, I went to swim, but a line caught my leg, dragged me down about 15 feet. I was pretty sure I was going to drown.
Every child's holiday should be bright and full of joy. Be part of Time Warner Cable Holiday Hopes and Happenings, working with the Salvation Army to benefit local children in our community. Drop off a new unwrapped toy at your local Time Warner Cable office, the Salvation Army, or at our sponsor locations to help them make the season bright.
Love Buick GMC and Time Warner Cable are partnering together to bring holiday happiness to local families this holiday season. Bring a new unwrapped toy to Love Buick GMC on Saturn Parkway, home of the low price guarantee.
The mast actually went into the water.
The ship was sinking.
The things got pretty crazy real quick. You didn't have much of a choice. You were going into the water.
Despite storm warnings, the captain and his 15-person crew of the HMS Bounty made the decision to leave port and weather the storm at sea. They now find themselves on a sinking ship, battling 30-foot waves in the middle of an epic storm.
I was sucked underwater to the point where I was pretty sure I was going to drown.
I got pushed under twice, at least twice. And at one point, I was on the surface and I looked up and there was a spar headed down for me. It was the boat was rolling.
That was the scariest part because the wave action was lifting the boat up and the mast up out of the water with all this rigging in it. And so you were in the water looking up.
The mainmast slammed down and nearly crushed me. Immediately, some of the rigging caught onto a bag that I'd clipped to myself. It dragged me down about 15 feet, just sucked in salt water and diesel and whatever else was floating in the water.
I was floating fairly low in the water. The waves were just crashing over me. There was another cluster of people, and they found one raft and managed to get it popped.
Tremendous waves all around us. The wind is howling, and we're holding on to this thing for dear life.
And if not for the teamwork of each other, none of us would have made it in a life raft. It took about almost an hour to get one person in.
When I got in, I was the 7th person in the raft. We had no idea where the other raft was. I suggested that people who cared might pray, and they did. And I said, I don't have any, I'm not religious, but I have faith in the Coast Guard.
We're going to do some searching here.
Roger. The C-130. Basically, we're making a plot of the scene to find out where the rafts are, if there's anybody in the water that we can see, and directing the helicopter out there to the people in trouble.
While surveying the rescue area, the C-130 pilot spots an unusual object in the waves.
Right off your 9 o'clock, there was a red object in the water there.
We see there's something in the water here that there's a strobe light attached to it that just doesn't look normal.
Could have been an immersion suit, possibly a life jacket, couldn't tell.
The C-130 radios the MH-60 helicopter to investigate.
Basically, keep your eyes open everywhere right now.
Roger. From what's the altitude, sir?
It's going to vary between 50 and 30 feet. I'm going to come down here a little bit more.
Helicopter is about 30 feet above the waves, which are also 30 feet high, so we're basically watching over them to make sure that the helicopter doesn't get in any trouble.
And I'm just going to hook back around to the right and face into the wind and come to a hover.
As we got close to the position, I could see a silhouette of it was just looked like a silhouette of something. It was something darker.
Not certain.
We've got a lot of debris out here.
Forward hold.
Jen, you want to double check?
Right off your 9 o'clock.
And it turned out that the object of interest was a single survivor in a survival suit floating by himself.
Okay, bring a swimmer to the door.
Our flight mechanic readied the swimmer.
Roger, stand by. How do you want to go? Sling?
Yeah, sling.
Roger. Roger, I have control of the hoist. Rescue checklist complete, ready for 1. Deployment of the rescue swimmer. Swimmer's on his way down.
I've never been in hurricane conditions like 30-footers before.
Hold, swimmer's going into the water. Swimmer's in the water, swimmer's away. Swimmer's okay, clear, move back on left 30. Clear back left.
I just got pounded by that wave, too.
There'd be short waves coming sideways, and there'd be smaller waves, bigger waves coming through, you know, just all kinds.
He was just swimming for all he was worth. The wind coupled with the current, coupled with the waves, was just a very extreme environment.
Even in survival suits, you don't want people to be in there any longer than they have to be.
All right, we got people on this raft.
Swimmer going down.
The swimmer got in the water, swam to the life raft. We got him up inside.
I lifted my mask up, and I said, "Hey, I'm Dan. I heard you guys need a ride."
Right off your 9 o'clock, there was a red object in the water there.
Immediately called back and said, we have a person in the water.
Swimmer's on his way down.
October 29th, 120 miles off the coast of North Carolina, the beloved HMS Bounty is sinking in 1,700 feet of water. 16 crew members, including its captain, Robin Walbridge, are fighting for their lives in 30-foot seas and gale force winds.
Hold, swimmer's going into the water. Swimmer's in the water, swimmer's away. Swimmer's okay, clear, move back on left 30. Clear back left.
I've never been in hurricane conditions like 30-footers before.
He would get swept by the current very quickly and was just swimming for all he was worth.
I made it to him, touched him, got jerked back, made it to him again, touched him, got jerked back again. Made it to him the third time, was able to grab onto him.
Easy left. Hold. Brake, take a load. Take a load.
He put a sling around the survivor, and then they were both hoisted back up into the aircraft together.
I think it was really good that we were able to get a helicopter to pick that guy up first. The waves were big, it was very windy. Things were drifting away from the boat pretty rapidly. By the time we got on there, the rafts were about 4 miles away.
Once we recovered the survivor, we went to the first life rafts.
Raft is blowing around. All right, we got people on this raft.
One of the people got up and looked out the window and he said, "There's a helicopter. They're putting somebody in the water." He's swimming over towards us.
Swimmer's in the water, swimmer's away. Swimmer's okay, clear, move back on left 30. Clear back left.
You've seen one guy poking his head out and he knew we were there, so I just stuck my head in the opening and, you know, said, "How's everybody doing in here?" kind of thing. And everybody just like looked straight at me with big wide eyes, and nobody said anything. They're just all pretty much in shock.
And then he asked who was the weakest swimmer, and I came to the conclusion that I fit that situation as well as anybody else. So I climbed out of the raft.
First survivors coming out of the raft. You got the basket ready?
It's rigged and ready, sir. Roger, I've target sighted by 2 o'clock. Best is going outdoor.
The seas were very high and dunked me in the water about 3 times because of the waves.
Easy, right? Hold.
The swimmer and the survivors are moving. The waves are moving. We had 30-foot seas out there and 50 knots of wind.
He swam me around, chasing the basket for a bit, got me in the basket.
All right, ready to pick up. Right 5. Uh-oh, wave got him. And he's back and left. The basket is clear water. He's back and left. That's outside cabin door. Bring basket inside cabin.
He's got the next one, so whenever you're ready.
The current would take him right to the life raft pretty quickly, and then he was swimming quite a bit to get back to the helicopter.
Basket outside cabin door. Bring basket inside cabin.
As the second survivor came in, you heard a cheer in the cabin, and then as each subsequent survivor came in, I kept hearing this noise, which I realized was them cheering as each person was brought up.
As the situation developed, helicopter gets guy out of the water right away. Morale picks up.
Okay.
Got that ready for pickup.
It's probably about 15 minutes maybe between each person we pulled out, because it's taking a little bit to get the basket back down and get in position, getting used to the size of the waves.
Oh, this one's a roller. That's going to be a bad one.
You could see what was going on below us. It was pretty amazing.
At dawn, 3 hours after the crew abandoned ship, the second MH-60 helicopter arrives at the rescue site.
When we arrived on scene, it was actually light out, so we could see what kind of seas and what kind of conditions we were facing.
I just remember that kind of that pit in my stomach, being able to see these monstrous waves in front of us. It kind of hit me in the face, like, you know, this is real, this is it, you know, this is what you signed up for.
When we got to the scene, the first helicopter was in a hover, low over the water, right next to the first raft.
We're hoisting the swimmer now. We're at our bingo, and we've got POV left on this raft here.
I had been doing fuel calculations for how long it was going to take us to get back and how much fuel we would need. The aircraft commander and I came to a number of 3,000 pounds of fuel as a bingo. We would not go lower than that before we turned around for home.
Start heading that way.
We're going direct home.
Yep.
We had reached our bingo, and it's really, there's no question, you just have to leave.
Low on fuel, they must head back to Elizabeth City and tend to the survivors' medical needs.
We were disappointed when they said they had the bingo. There were 3 people still in the raft. And we had no idea who was in the other raft. We didn't know who else was where.
We needed to get everyone back safely, but of course it made it a lot easier knowing that that second helicopter would come in right behind us.
The C-130 directs the second MH-60 helicopter to a second raft, which has been spotted less than a mile away.
Where are they?
Just out the right side here, out the cabin door.
Got them.
Coming down to 80 feet.
Roger that. Reset right up to 80 feet. 6031, we are getting ready to deploy the rescue swimmer. Cannot confirm number of souls in the raft.
When we first approached the life raft, the canopy was closed. So we didn't know what we were going to find.
Soon after daybreak, we could hear the sound of the helicopter. You know, we stuck our heads out and saw, you know, made contact with the Coast Guard.
And you see these, you know, 4 or 5 little faces poking out, waving their arms.
6031, we have confirmed people on board.
Okay, just like we said, we'll deploy and I'm not going to put you directly upswell. I have you a little bit off to the left so we're not blowing all our rotor wash right into them. That sounds good.
I was excited. It's what we trained for. I had a little bit of anxiety in there too because it is the biggest that I've ever been in.
Swimmer's at the cabin door. Rescue checklist complete. Ready for launch direct deployment with quick strap.
Once I got to the door, you know, the training does kick in. It's kind of like go time. It just need to get the job done.
Load check complete. Swimmer go down.
It was pretty awesome gazing out of the opening in our raft during the hurricane force winds with these huge waves and a rescue diver being lowered down on a little cable.
Swimmer's in the water.
The swimmer got in the water, swam to the life raft. We got him up inside.
I lifted my mask up, big smile on my face, looked around, and I said, "Hey, I'm Dan. I heard you guys need a ride."
Once the swimmer gets them clear of the raft, we'll do some basket recoveries, and altitude will be the same as before. I know they've been through hell tonight, but it would be nice if those people could jump out and get this going. Survivors in the water with Dan.
From that point on, I'd grab them, they'd get off, we'd go to the basket, I'd go right back, swim up to the raft, and say, all right, next one, let's go.
Prepare, take the load. Taking the load.
When it was my turn to get rescued, just pretty much plopped out of the raft because my suit was so hard to move in. The rescue swimmer grabbed me and swam me backwards towards the basket.
Taking the load.
Laying in the basket and looking up at the chopper as the basket swam back and forth. It was just awesome. It was a lot of fun. That basket ride was pretty cool.
There's one nice wave coming at him there. It's easily a 30-footer right there.
Oh, there's another one right behind it.
Oh, this one's a roller. That's going to be a bad one.
I turned around while I was in the water, and I noticed that the whole 30-foot wave wouldn't be breaking.
Yeah, here we go.
Life raft flipped over.
That whole raft just got tossed.
The life raft flipped it over upside down.
Are they in the water?
Yeah.
My immediate concern was if we don't get in there quick enough, we're going to be recovering 4 bodies instead of 4 survivors.
That's easily a 30-footer right there.
Yeah, here we go.
That whole raft just got tossed.
A wave had hit the raft and flipped it.
Of the 16 crew members from the sunken HMS Bounty, 7 survivors have already been rescued. 4 remained on the first life raft, 3 on the second, and 2 were unaccounted for.
Are they in the water?
Looks like they're on their way.
So we had to swim, get our way out of the life raft, and hang on to the outside of it.
My immediate concern was if we don't get in there quick enough, we're going to be recovering 4 bodies instead of 4 survivors.
I immediately sprinted as hard as I could to that raft. Luckily, they had all made it out, and they had all grabbed onto the rope that was attached to the side of their raft.
Looks like we got 4 PIWs.
We were floating. The waves were battering us around real good.
From that point on, it was still just swim up to the raft, do my hand-over-hand technique, and say, all right, next one, let's go.
I'm going to come back forward a little bit.
Swimmer's a basket.
Grab the next survivor.
No sooner did I get in the basket than a huge wave hit me and banged my head really hard into the top of the basket. But as long as I was going up inside that helicopter, they could have rocked all they wanted to.
All right, he's got the next person. Begin the hoist.
All right,
when you're ready.
All ready to go whenever you are, sir.
I'd go right back, same thing. Next one, let's go.
Harness recovery from 35 feet.
Swimmer's just underneath the cabin door. Swimmer's inside cabin. Hoist complete.
We're going to start transitioning forward.
Roger. Ready to go.
Got the other raft in sight.
First crew had to go back for gas. They had left 3 people accounted for in that first raft. We still had time to go out and pick up some more people.
The swimmers are only human, and we saw how Petty Officer Todd was getting tossed around. So we asked him, like, how are you? Can you do it?
You know, that's when I kind of thought to myself, I'm pretty tired right now, but all right, you know, get game on.
He rogered right up and said, no problem, I'm good to go.
Swimmer's going into the water.
I got lowered back down into the water, went over to the raft, I jumped in and said, all right, 3 of you? Yep, it all still here, no injuries, no injuries. All right, let's go, baskets. And then that's what we did.
Basket's just outside cabin door. Bring basket in.
You gotta say something about a man's character where he'd come out of a helicopter in those conditions to go to rescue and save people's lives, people he's never met before.
Swimmer's on his way up. Swimmer's inside cabin. Hoist complete. Y'all cool if I shut the door?
You may. Rescue checklist part 3 when you're done.
When I got back up into the helicopter, I could tell that they felt very tired as well. Everybody did. It was very somber. I handed out some waters to everybody because I knew that they probably ingested some stuff, just like I did while I was out there.
We had 9 people in the helicopter, all of us laying on top of each other, which is pretty typical because we're a pretty close crew and we keep things tight. And you just wanted to get up and hug everybody, but you couldn't because you're in this immersion suit that was full of water, so you could barely move.
We were so very happy to be alive. And I said, those guys, they're my heroes.
The survivors were seasick. One had a possible broken arm.
One of the mates had taken a really bad throw. It compressed one of his vertebrae, 3 or 4 broken ribs, and dislocated his arm. It was like an hour-and-a-half flight for us to get back in.
We had a really long helicopter ride until we finally got to the Coast Guard base.
We landed and taxied over by the C-130 hangar to offload the survivors.
We pulled up, and there's already news cameras here, which I'd never seen before.
We were instantly greeted with a whole host of people to help us.
There was 3 coasties on each one of us to take care of our every need, and they just took extremely good care of us.
They had to cut the bottoms out of our immersion suits so that the water could drain and we could walk. They gave us blankets. We had Coast Guard jumpsuits, lots of food. They were very welcoming and very providing.
The Coast Guard were stars.
As soon as I dropped all the people off the EMS, it was huge. It was awesome. We're getting high fives, you know, walking back to the plane. So it was definitely, I was excited, stoked to be doing it.
When the second helicopter came in, we found out who'd been picked up, and we were so pleased to see them.
You initially grab things that you think that you're gonna want, and when you get in the water, that's the last thing you need. All you need is to see each other's faces again. We saw that John was sitting up in an ambulance, and so we were glad to know that he had made it.
And then we realized who hadn't come in. So that was hard.
In the coldest conditions, a hero never freezes.
We go in some really bad situations, and we always pull it off.
Coast Guard Alaska, next, only on the Weather Channel.
I really love my hardwood floors.
14 of the 16 crew members are now safely back at Elizabeth City, North Carolina. But the Coast Guard's work is far from finished. Captain Robin Walbridge and crew member Claudine Christian still remain lost at sea.
Come down to 800. 800. Okay. I don't have anybody in sight yet.
Once we know that we're in prolonged searches, they start bringing up any available air crews, anybody and everybody. We had aircraft from all over coming up, including all the way down from Florida to assist with the search.
Keep a sharp lookout. Breaking the city, United States Coast Guard Sector St. Petersburg, Florida out.
It doesn't stop there. We're looking ahead to what the next search is, adjusting our search plan to give us the best chance of success.
Air 15 Sector, Roger. Request ETA to search area. Also, could I get a field data? Over.
We searched for many hours, and we found one crew member who was unfortunately not responsive at the time and was eventually pronounced dead at the hospital.
Claudine came on board, and she fell in love with the boat. And we fell in love with her. And I'm so sorry she's gone.
I've been associated with the ship a couple of times over the years as a tall ship sailor myself. In fact, I know the master who was lost with the ship, Robin Walbridge.
I had spoken with him previously when they made a port visit in Wilmington earlier in the year. And he told me about some of the storms that they'd been in. You know, he'd been in heavy weather before.
In the past, the ship had been through far worse storms with much higher seas, much stronger winds, and fared perfectly well.
We don't know what happened with the master of the HMS Bounty.
I never saw the captain on the deck. Last time I saw him was on the 'tween deck when he was trying to make sure everybody was taken care of and getting in their immersion suits.
My guess is he ended up tangled in the rigging and sank with the boat.
We searched 10,000 square miles of ocean. We had 22 different search patterns. We searched at night. We searched with different types of aircraft. We searched with forward-looking infrared.
When we end up having to notify families that their loved ones aren't coming home, I think that's the most difficult part of my job.
I miss that man. I will miss that man for the rest of my life.
It was very tragic that we lost 2 people, but we're very, very fortunate, and through proper training and also having the proper supplies that we needed, that 14 people did make it out alive.
The ship had touched so many people, and it's gone.
The decision to suspend an active search is always a tough one. We only do it after we determine that without additional facts, we're not going to be able to find this individual.
We treat every search like it's a member of our family out there, and when we can't find them, it's painful.
Had to make the decision on if we were going to suspend the active search, and I had to make that decision. And so I talked with the sector commander about how we were going to do that and ensured that we passed on to the family so that they were aware prior to suspending the active search.
All of this effort that you've put out, everything that you've done so far, and your loved one's not coming home.
When we got back from the rescue, our maintenance chief walked on the plane, and he mentioned that the survivors were actually here in Elizabeth City, and that they wanted to speak to us.
We got to thank the C-130 crew, and they got hugs all around.
One of the survivors told me that as soon as they heard our aircraft flying overhead, they just had an overwhelming sense of relief knowing that help was there, they knew where they were, and that they were going to be safe.
Without the Coast Guard, none of us would be here.
They take care of mariners, and mariners are a family, and the Coast Guard people are part of our family.
Hurricane Sandy tore a path of destruction through 24 states along the East Coast, leaving death and devastation in its wake. As a show of gratitude, the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard flew down from Washington, D.C. to personally congratulate the Elizabeth City rescue crew for going above and beyond the call of duty.
I wanted to come down and congratulate our crews for doing such a fine job in some very challenging flying circumstances, going out in a hurricane.
That it's a significant event when the Commandant of the Coast Guard and Vice Admiral come down to specifically shake the hands of everybody who were involved in this rescue.
The President said, in fact, I think one of the best stories throughout this whole ordeal was the rescue of the crew members off the HMS Bounty. And he said, and you know, there's this guy named Dan.
One of my favorite stories is down in North Carolina, the Coast Guard going out to save a sinking ship. They sent a rescue swimmer out. And the rescue swimmer said, "Hi, I'm Dan. I understand you guys need a ride." You know, that kind of spirit of resilience and strength, but most importantly, looking out for one another, that's why we always bounce back from these kinds of disasters.
So the President picked up on that as well. Thanks so much for the great job that you always do down here. Nobody gets the job done by themselves. It takes a good crew to get the job done.
Everybody, all of them, really true concern about our well-being. The Coasties are the ones that made sure that we were okay.
I think it just speaks to the fact, you know, that the Coast Guard, air stations throughout the United States, you know, we stand the watch. And if it wasn't me or my crew, and it would have been somebody else equally qualified and trained to go out and do it.
It resets the bar. This is in the realm of possibility of something as an organization we can do. We can accomplish this.
For us, that night, 14 survivors of the Bounty, given the conditions, that was a success story.